answer for what you have done.
Yone, turn back.
You have dishonored us. You swore to protect him!
You swore to protect Ionia. Look around you, brother. Your honor stains the ground.
Better than living without it. I'm sorry, brother. I will not fail you again. Better than living without it.
Yone. I am no murderer.
Then why are you running?
I'm done running. No murderer. Killing people is a bad habit. But I can't seem to quit.
I do not agree with Yone being in League of Legends. Now, for a champion who's new, pretty cool, and plays and feels very similar to their younger brother, slash murderer, slash wanted fugitive who's still yet to be put on trial for the alleged murder of an Ionian elder, this might sound like quite a contentious position to hold. Now, while Yasuo's dead big brother may sound like a great addition into the game, it is actually the very fact that Yone is associated with Yasuo very closely, especially within Yasuo's lore, which is where the conflict arises, as well as the fair preemptive assumption many of you may have that it is the state of his kit, and the fact that he's a tad strong in terms of gameplay, which is additionally an issue. Having a 7 mastery Yasuo main on your team was a bit of an issue, but now with the possibility of having 2, well then it is obviously apparent why these two are related. But you might get one on either team and then it's a coin flip as to who wins or loses the game. Yes, Yone's kit is a little overbearing and I can identify several problems of it thematically and character-wise. But my problem isn't just alone with Yone's kit. In fact, Yone's kit is only one of 3 reasons. Riot's decision to include a second Yasuo for interesting gameplay purposes is fair enough. However, you have to make it make sense within the context of the lore and the character, which I fear it doesn't. Making them overpowered in-game, which is a disproportionate representation of who they once were within the lore, is a very lazy and disrespectful way of actually creating and introducing a character into the game, especially a character whose background resides within the lore of another character already established in the game. Riot have already proven that they can create and establish ground-up characters to build and flesh out the setting and lore around the game. They play and feel just as good as they sound within the lore, and the players feel every moment of that within the experience. But when you mine an already depleted ore vein in order to gain your influence, it just feels rehashed and done before, and you're not really adding anything new to the experience. In fact, you're taking away from the already established experience that the original character created. Time waits for no game, and it's League's turn to pay its dues. as I've come to realise that the longer League of Legends goes on, the more it begins to divorce from its original vision. Much of this new phenomenon is as a result of the addition of the newest champions, Yone being the one I'll focus on in this video. The steps towards making a new champion are running through the original development notes of an old champion, swap out a couple names and places, and a couple details here and there, put it on an assembly line, and out comes your new champion. Not only are old champion dev notes being used to make new champions, but it seems like Riot are vigorously scouring through their old lore texts in order to find a standout name that they can now drop into the game. They just pluck out a champion name from the old lore, put them into the game, read through what happened to that character in the old lore, and then just recontextualize the current state of the game and the lore, regardless of all the character interactions and development that went along the way to the current state through that character's involvement in the lore. And ta-da! This new character is now involved within the current state of League of Legends, fully aware and acknowledging what has happened to them and their interactions within the past, yet they continue like nothing has happened, and the old characters who were influenced by that character's choices and decisions which led to them being in the game in the first place are completely unaffected by this character's addition into the game. Even if the new character's introduction into the game would drastically change the motivations and character development of the older characters associated with them. Perhaps I'm exaggerating, perhaps you agree with me, and maybe this conversation and topic has been done to death before, but I'm going to get my word out on it because I don't see this stopping anytime soon. That being said, I'm going to state the 3 reasons why I do not agree with Yone being in League of Legends. The first issue is Yone's ripple effect on the other champions associated with him. Fairly straightforward, a champion who was once named within the lore and associated with other characters now being playable and alive again is going to have some serious consequences. Everyone who read the lore for half a second were probably delighted to hear Yasuo was getting his brother introduced into the game. Everyone who read the lore for more than half a second were probably as worried as I am that Yasuo was getting his brother introduced into the game. To top it off, Yasuo doesn't operate in a vacuum. His character development was influencing other characters within his overall story. Progressing his story, along with Yone being introduced, has now affected other characters in ways people seem not to care about. This has unfortunately slipped in a very damning trend within League of Legends and its lore. I will be addressing this in more detail later because this is actually one of the biggest issues I have with regards to point 1 and Yone's introduction into the game, fortified additionally by other champions who are slowly being introduced into the game. Point 2 is Yone's kit. There are a good number of players in any game who don't actually care about the details of who the character is, what, where, why, when, how. They just care about how well they play and how effective are they at actually winning, or their utility within the setting of a team game, with League of Legends as the obvious example here. However, a champion's kit serves as a very important tool for representing the personality and aptitude of the person you are playing, heavily linking to who they are in the context of the lore. A player's first impression of a champion is defined by the quality of their kit and their in-game presentation. A player can truly be immersed into the experience of the character via the performative execution of this champion, giving the player an excellent snapshot into the life of how this champion performs within the lore and the true potential of the fictional world that Riot have created. In the case for Yone, there's a little bit of an issue with him. I will also be addressing the trends within Riot's new champion creation, as all the champions seem to be overpowered, particularly the new ones, and most of them all seem to have absolutely no unique ideas of their own. Point 3 is the frightening realization, though not one I could say I didn't see coming, that the established lore and setting of League of Legends is meaningless. Heavily linking to point 1, most of the lore was built upon by the champions and their interactions and their progression with one another in an ongoing cohesive story. It was hardly perfect, but the original lore had characters and setting involved in an ongoing story, connecting with one another, meaningful interactions and events that actually occurred that influenced the outcome of the story. It also had a clear setting in which the gameplay and lore were actually linked to one another. Champions were motivated into doing something, and there was actually a reason for gameplay in which the players could effectively play out an ongoing and self-contained story or event within the game without breaking the lore. But thanks to the addition and possibility of champions like Yone, all this means basically nothing anymore. If you had to introduce Yone into the game as a contemporary playable character without breaking the law in any way, you'd effectively have to tear up a lot of the already established rules within the game and the lore. There'd be a lot of character breaches here and there. You'd have to continue the timeline in some way. It'd be very messy, and Riot skipped a lot of steps in order to ensure this happened. Thanks to all those skipped steps, we now have Yone in the game. All the characters are played and continue as is from when we first introduced ourselves to them, and there seems to be almost no consequences to the story progression that had to have occurred thanks to Yone now being in the game. There are many other champions and concepts that are adding and perpetuating this issue, but for now I will be talking about Yone, the Unforgotten, and why I do not agree with him being in League of Legends. Let's start with my first point for reason number 1. And the first issue I have with Yone is that Yone is dead. Or at least he was dead. Yone is one more champion in a nice long list of champions who have been revived. Brought back from the brink, or in this case just straight up absolute death. And that's where my first gripe lies. Death as a concept and a force of nature has just lost all meaning within League of Legends. I don't mind if a champion's origins involve defying death in some way, but if you're going to have multiple reasons and avenues for this, they have to make sense within the context of the lore. Yone being alive really throws a spanner in the works. It was never really foreshadowed or hinted in any way that Yone could or would be back. And now it's just starting to feel like any champion who was once dead, or a named dead character somewhere within the lore, has a chance of coming back to life now. This is the danger zone I referred to earlier. Be warned, there are multiple characters whose names are mentioned in the lore who are either dead or missing, who can now be introduced into the game in spite completely of all their character direction or the impact their death had on the lore. In terms of ways in which an undead spirit being or non-human, gone but now back again character can be in the game, I think I've identified 3 safe categories in which they can exist in. Those 3 categories are the Shadow Isles, spirit demons or gods in some way, or literally a revived zombie. The Shadow Isles is pretty straightforward. Big harrowing mist comes along, touches you, and you're cursed into some undead evil personification of whatever you once were. The beings of the Shadow Isles seem to be some sort of demonic spirit beings of some kind. They seem to live forever, or at least have an extremely long lifespan, and they're almost comprised of some unique dark energy. There's probably a lot of fine details that I won't be bothered going into, but you understand the concept of the Shadow Isles. Champions like Callista, Hecarim, and others who obviously emit that green, ghoulish glow to them all reside in the Shadow Isles, and they are effectively undead as well. The second category I've safely reserved for spirit beings, beings of pure energy, vessels of some god, demons, powerful ancient entities that possess people, all the fancy mythical stuff where Riot are allowed to have the most leeway within their setting. Beings like Xerath and Brand aren't exactly physically human anymore, and there's no way in which a standard normal human could live like that in the world. So they're more beings or vessels of energy. Some godlike beings or deities like the Targon gods are humans who are chosen by these gods to be avatars, and that vessel's body and spirit effectively become immortal like the god themselves. The same can also be said for demonic or evil spirit characters. It'd be unfair to say that some of these come under undead, but when you're a being like Xerath or Brand, are you technically still alive at that point? Some of these demons live almost a repetitive, torturous existence, maybe remaining bound or jumping from one host to another. It's fairly difficult to exactly describe this concept, but you get the idea when you look at a champion like Xerath, and when they die, their body just completely dissipates. Or when a champion like Nocturne dies and he gets swallowed into some deep abyss. The third category being the zombie category, and there might be some leeway or confusion as to why they might link to the other ones. I'll explain that here. Champions like Sion, or Sion, however you wish to pronounce it, who were killed in a war and then dragged back and then revived through blood magic, would fit into this category. Even champions like Severe, who were, at least in her new lore, killed and then forcibly revived by magic. I'd even put Gangplank in this category, especially because in his new lore he was effectively killed off and even removed from playability within the game. He actually could not compete, but because he came back, he basically cheated death, and I think that's fair to put him in here. But where I'd argue this one does not cross over with the other two categories is that the Shadow Isles is a uniform and universal method of reviving characters, or at least turning them into these undead spectre beings. And the second method is more transcending a mortal body, in which case the mortal body might actually be destroyed or compromised as a result. Whereas this category focuses more on dying or dead characters who are being brought back in their reanimated state by force or by some other method. So Shadow Isles, Spirit Being, or Back from the Dead, and I like to think those are the three categories. Since Yone is back from the dead, let's see which category he fits into, and the easiest way to see what category he fits into is to read his lore. So Yone gets one hit killed by his brother, enters some fantasy spirit world after he dies, fights a demon, kills the demon, I think. The demon then body snatches or possesses him, and then he's just back in the mortal world with a changed new appearance. Is that how it works over in Ionia? I think that puts him in the second category, but he's just back alive again, and it's through this demon in some spirit world, so it sounds like the third category? I'm not actually too sure. Say, did Kindred get a say in any of this? What even is resurrection at this point? When was this possibility established within League of Legends? I didn't exactly explain all of it, but there are some clear rules as to why a champion can come back to life. It really feels like Yone's just taken his liberties with this one, or Riot I should say. This probably sounded like a great idea in the dev room for why we should bring back another champion and a way we can expand our lore further. But this really feels like we're just adding anything just because. You know, what makes Yone special? Is this trick just exclusive to Ionians? Do you have to be in a certain place at a certain time? Do you have to die in a certain way? It's like, hey, if you die, don't worry, you get a chance at life again. All you have to do is beat this demon, and then you get another chance at life. And even if you lose, the demon can jump you and you get resurrected again. Does this not sound clumsy to anyone but me? Is it play till you win over in Ionia? Even if we were to bring Yone back into the game, there's so many easy avenues they could have chosen. Do you want to make him a Shadow Isles champion? Simple, have him be consumed by the Harrowing. Do you want to make him a zombie? Simple, just phone up LeBlanc or Vladimir, have them resurrect him like they did Sion. Do you want to have him an energy ascended being? Or simple, have an already existing deity of some form, bring him back to life. There's so many options to resurrection now that at what point do champions or characters just within the lore understand that death is really not a bad option anymore? They can easily come back to life. And again, is there any arbiter that decides who can come back and who can't? Are champions going to be lining up to like Death or Kindred and going to be writing a list of characters that they want back to life? Or is it a complete dice roll as to who comes back and who doesn't? You know, using your random resurrection nodes on random characters, maybe, but the fact that you brought Yone back to life, a character whose death was actually extremely important to Yasuo's lore and the fate of Ionia going forward, but then we just introduced this random new concept of demons in some spirit world afterlife that can bring a character back to life, and now Yone is in the game now. Yone, of all characters in the lore, defying death, completely undermines the sacrifice that he made that actually led up to the moments of him dying and the progression of Yasuo. Have Riot run completely out of ideas? Do we not know who else to bring into this game? Well, I don't think Yone is a great idea. His death served a purpose. Why are we bringing dead characters back into the game anyway? If they're dead, let them be dead. Yone's revival and insertion into League of Legends going forward serves as a reminder that death holds no consequences anymore. This damning trend eliminates any stakes going forward when writing the lore, and is going to serve as a backdoor gateway into introducing characters who really should not be in the game, given the character development of the champions who forged the lore and made all the important events and details that went forward into creating the world. I said this earlier and I'll reiterate it again. Any named character in the lore is now up for being brought back into the game, regardless of how they will influence the current roster of champions and the reasons they were introduced into the game in the first place. You know, maybe you're a normie and you like the ideas of new characters randomly being introduced into the game. Fair enough. Maybe you like the fact that dead characters have every excuse under the sun as to why they can come back to life. And maybe you've also just ignored the fact that Kindred has been made redundant, but it feels like League is now playing with death so much that it's lost all its meaning. At least death and resurrection inside the game had a canonical reason that was actually linked to the location and setting, that being the Institute of War and the fact that these champions were avatars summoned in a controlled setting. But outside of the actual gameplay in the setting of the lore, there is no excuse for this. Bringing a random nobody back to life is one thing. Bringing a character back to life whose very introduction and purpose in the story and lore of any fictional work was to serve as the motivating factor and inspiration for the character's now found identity within the world is a completely separate and more dangerous to tackle concept altogether, especially when the two characters are very closely related and extremely important to one another. Since the topic of this video is Yone, it's fairly obvious who the mystery affected character is, that being Yasuo, the Unforgiven. The Unforgiven, you say? I thought the whole reason he was unforgiven was because of the crime he was accused of committing, and the fact that he killed his brother, which led him on a journey to seek forgiveness, whether he even wants to or not, unless I'm mistaken. But following Yone's character introduction into the game, and the continuation of Yasuo's lore following this whole Spirit Blossom storyline, they've actually completed Yasuo's journey. He's at peace with his brother, he found out who the killer is, and he's been absolved of his crime. You know, come to think of it, why are we even playing Yasuo anymore? I guess we should be calling him the Forgiven now. But this is a bold claim I'm making, that Yasuo shouldn't even be in the game. Well, allow me to explain. You see, every champion has at least one driving motivation factor for why they are even fighting or doing whatever they are doing in the context of who they are in the game. Whether killing things for sport or for food or whatever, or because they're a driven individual motivated by an end goal. Yasuo had 3 reasons for why he picked up his sword and continued his fight. One reason is to avenge Yone, which also ties in nicely with the second reason, which was to absolve his name and to lay Yone's memory to rest along with the other Ionians who sacrificed their life trying to stop Yasuo because of a false murder accusation. Having feared Ionia turned on him, Yasuo fought to kill anyone who tried to stop him, including his own brother, but until he found out that he was only being hunted due to the alleged murder of an Ionian elder, he thought that all the death he had committed against his fellow Ionians was wrong, and now a good chunk of his motivation rests on redeeming himself and absolving his name, ensuring that the Ionians are laid peacefully to rest and that their deaths and sacrifice were not in vain for what they believed in. And what they believed in was pretty revealing. They had accused Yasuo of murdering the Elder because the Elder was killed by a wind technique, whom Yasuo is the only known master of. It would be fair to say though that Yasuo has completely turned his back on Ionia, because he sees these as more personal self-attainment goals, as he seems completely indifferent and bears no more resemblance or acquaintance with any Ionian members, and you can tell by his interactions. So just as a little bonus, remember every time you watch the Awaken cinematic that all of the Ionians view Yasuo as one of the most dangerous enemies and traitors to ever step foot on Ionian soil, and Yasuo sees all of Ionia as effectively dead to him, since they believed that he is a traitor and are willing to send anyone to kill him. And Yasuo's third reason for why he continues his fight and journey was that there's an assassin on the loose who killed the Elder who Yasuo was accused of killing, and Yasuo cannot let that murderer go unpunished. Yasuo murdered his own flesh and blood on the accusation that it was him who murdered the Elder. Upon finding out that his name had been tarnished by another wind technique, Yasuo knew what his purpose was from then on. He looked upon his brother's grave one last time, and on the journey he went, evading his former Ionian allies who now seek to kill him, but on a personal journey to bring that killer to justice, one way or another. It was never explicitly mentioned by name the identity of the person responsible for murdering the Elder, but when Yasuo was introduced into the game he had several interactions, many denigrating his fellow Ionians who now he sees as enemies, but one set of interactions directed at Riven for his knowledge of a 3-strike process and a wind technique being present on her skill set. Yasuo's lore primarily takes place during the first Ionian Noxus invasion, the same invasion which Riven participated in, and was the one that subsequently led to her defecting from Noxus. This is a fairly clever way of introducing a character into the game. It gives some answers that you can maybe draw from as to why Riven has her moveset. It adds a little more context and detail into the specifics as to why she left the Noxus army, as well as fleshing out her own personality and motivations going forward from that event. And then a character who had a staked investment position in the events that Riven participated in is then introduced with their own motivations and their own path to follow. Pretty good writing here. You got some clear motivations on both sides and you're not shoehorning the characters together. There is still enough ambiguity as to the direction that this is going to go in, but enough information so that you understand the context of the situation. So great writing so far. Given that the game is set in this Institute of War, and champions are introduced with their own set of motivations and their own character progressions going on in the background, you should probably let this story stand as it is, let this rivalry continue on with the player base, and allow the contemporary time-fixed motivations of the champion to remain. You know, let the player base have their headcanon as to how the game ends, let them play it out in-game. You know, the last thing you want to do in a situation like this, especially with an ongoing game like League of Legends, is to tell everybody how this ends within the canonical lore of the game. You know, Riot wouldn't do that, right? Right? You have the perfect setup here. You have the perfect characters. They're clearly motivated. You're not gonna ruin this, are you, Riot? Who am I trying to fool? Of course they ruin it. So Riot in their infinite wisdom decide to spoil the ending of a game where there's not really a clear way of presenting this ending without drastically removing the cast. But in doing so, Riot have inevitably caused even more problems to arise with the lore and characters. One obvious issue is the massive anticlimactic resolution to this conflict. You know, we couldn't even play this out in game. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the special event of the night. The fans have voted. The fans will be choosing who will win. It is Nightbringer versus Dawnbringer, the rivalry of the century. The winner will resolve the conflict between these two combatants. You don't want to miss this, exclusive for one night only in Summoner's Rift. Well, now that's completely gone to waste. You just said it, you just told us, and you just forced it into the canon. What are we meant to do with it now? Not only has the conflict between them dissipated, we can't even call them rivals anymore, but what's Yasuo gonna do now? He's completed his goals. Another big issue that arises out of this is that Riven is the victim of all the collateral damage as a result. Quite the domino effect of adding Yone into the game to completely butchering Riven as a character. Allow me to explain Riven. When someone says, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned," well, that woman has nothing on Riven, the poster child for all that Noxus stood for: strength, determination, and an unshakable loyalty to the expansion of the Empire. The men worked out so they could look like Riven. The women wanted to go out with Riven. Whatever direction Riven marched in, the Noxus army got behind her and marched the same direction. Every weapon in the Noxus army was so lightweight and wimpy for Riven that they had to forge a gigantic blade for her to use, and she still one-handed it. She wore full battle armor, a gigantic longsword, and could still perform flicks in combat for very long periods of time. Now that is a warrior, but her most desirable feature was the ability to compress the chest of any mortal who dared get in her way, and exhibit no sign of empathy or remorse for such an action. Indeed, the Noxus killing machine was truly a force to be reckoned with. All that human capital and nothing to spend it on. Riven was truly soul-searching, and she found her way into the Noxus machine. Her first mission saw her deployed into the lands of Ionia, where soldiers apparently resurrect themselves endlessly to throw what little resistance one would expect the Ionians to muster at Riven. Realizing that Ionian bones were all too fragile, Riven began to contemplate whether all this bloodshed was worth it. That was until Noxus's experimental anti-Ionian resurrection strategy was deployed. In order for Riven to experience a challenge, she had unwittingly left hardcore mode on, and the gas used to kill the Ionians also killed Noxians alike. Noxus soldiers, Ionians, and even their children were all being killed before Riven's eyes, and that was when the long-sleeping human within Riven's soul finally awoke to the surface. Seeing the carnage wrought by the experimental gas as the perfect opportunity to defect from the Noxus military, Riven decided to strip herself of her armor, break her weapon, and terminate her service to Noxus, inevitably joining the Institute of War, where she decided to make a new name for herself and start anew on her own path. The character design and details explicit in the character model of Riven clearly connote an experienced yet deeply emotionally scarred ex-soldier, still wearing the remnants of her old armor, travelling light only in rags that have displayed obvious wear and tear and lack of maintenance, and a sword that mirrors the owner, wielded with virtue and determination in order to make up for what she has brought with that very weapon. If you're a woman and you're built like Riven, and you make it as the poster child and the captain of the military in the nation that values strength above all, where you wielded a massive sword twice your size and wore full heavy armor into battle and was capable of swinging it around effortlessly, if the law states that you broke your sword and you stripped yourself of your armor, I'm going to safely assume that you did it physically, probably breaking the sword over your own knee. But my presumption of Riven being a relevant character be damned, because apparently Riot decided that Riven, in full Noxian attire, unable to break her own weapon, decided to approach an Ionian elder, probably in a very secure building, and ask for their assistance in breaking the weapon for her. Really strips the thunder out of her, doesn't it? I knew the Ionians were a bunch of losers, but this is embarrassing. They couldn't do anything. I know it was described as a slaughter, but you have no safety precautions for any of this? But if you didn't think Ionia was useless yet, wait till you hear this part. So apparently, Riven, in all her attire wielding her massive sword, managed to march into a very secluded and sacred Ionian temple, all alone into a very high priority Ionian building, with no present Noxian witnesses, where she then proceeded to strike a conversation with the only Ionian elder in that building, where she then convinces him to break her weapon and kill himself, where she is then allowed afterwards to walk out scot-free, no harm, no foul, no witnesses of the entire event. Where do I start with this? Firstly, apparently no Ionians witnessed this event. This was never spoken about to anyone except afterwards when they found his dead corpse. But I have a question. If they were the only ones in that scenario, and he killed himself, and he broke the blade, didn't they see the broken shards of the blade? Didn't they see her broken armor on the floor as well? Or did Riven really sweep that under the rug afterwards? She really covered her tracks with this one. You'd almost assume she killed him. Well, apparently not. According to the lore story, they did find shards of the blade. It's just that they were so incompetent they didn't think to present this as evidence. There's a unique weapon or material with a unique magical trace to it, and you don't think that's significant into the murder? You just up and blame Yasuo for this? Secondly, Ionians couldn't tell that that was suicide. He's the only person who knows the wind technique, and he was probably killed in such a way that you can tell the wounds or the injuries. And if you can even see the runic blade shards on the floor, maybe you can, detect the magic entities within that. I don't know anything. Again, the lore story indicates they already knew this information. Are they just randomly beating a dead horse? Do they just really hate Yasuo for some reason? But back to the incompetency of Ionians. Riven is not an easy target to miss. You will see her stamping around, and assuming Riven is the character she was built up to be, she'd cause a scene. She probably would have broken the door down. She probably would have smashed several bodies along the way. There's no way she went through undetected. And again, that elder wasn't evacuated. No one had a contingency plan to get him out of the area or building. She managed to get through there pretty easily, and no one seemed to notice her massive Noxian emblem on her armor. Heck, even Yasuo says, if I was there, I could have stopped this. Well no, if you were there, you would have agreed to the ceremony as well. Riven wanted her blade to be broken. There is nothing you could have done that would have stopped the events from ensuing. What, was Yasuo going to talk his master out of it? His master agreed to it. His master is the reason this whole situation occurred. But enough ripping Ionia. Riven is the real loser in this situation. Once you found out that it was Riven who killed that Ionian elder in the Ionian building, you probably thought, yes, Riven storms in the building, crushes that man's chest, storms out, continues slaughtering people until the gas happens. Heck, you'd even think that they may have even gotten into a fight, and that's maybe where Riven learned or harnessed the power of the wind technique. Maybe the runic blade steals magical powers from its enemies. Who knows? But what did Riven do? She went in there, behind enemy lines in the middle of a war to a high-valued Ionian target, while being a Noxian murderer, the only master of the wind technique in that building capable of performing this feat, and begged him, the mighty Riven, on her knees, begging for the weapon to be broken. I'm going to make a solid and very inarguable case here, but unless these lore stories are non-canon, this is pure character assassination on Riven. There is absolutely no coming back from this. Not only should this be non-canon, but assuming it is canon, I've read all 3 of the stories pertaining to this chain of events regarding Riven. If these are canon, Riven, as we know and play her in the game, is a non-canon alternate universe variant of Riven. Yes, Riven herself is non-canon in her own game. My reason? The Riven we know and play still has a motivating driving force for why she continues to fight for something. She actually has different goals now. According to this lore story, however, there's no indication that Riven has any worth fighting for anything. In fact, she actively wants to be away, be rid of all fighting and her weapon and her past altogether. There's actually no reason, especially following this new interpretation of Riven, for why she is even a playable character in the game. We are literally playing the carried over version of Riven from when they first made her, only now that they've retconned her story, we have to keep her in the game in a new what-if scenario. Riot just added way too many details into a story we didn't need the answers to. And when you add too many details, you ruin the mystery of it. Riven will forever be that cold, hard warrior who couldn't even break her own weapon. She had to go and beg the enemy to do it for her. And he accepted this? It killed him. Surely he knew that was going to happen. Riven wasn't going to kill him. She's not tough enough for that. Complete and utter character destruction. What also bothers me is that the old lore actually addressed the details of her old armor and how she wears the remnants of it. But according to the new retcon of Riven, she was always dressed in rags, even as a soldier. Her look and outfit was the same in adulthood as it was in childhood. What even is this? I'm actually completely unconvinced she was any strong at all. Heck, what even are the Noxian standards at this point? You know what, I take back all the big talk I gave about Riven. See, once characters are connected like this, adding or changing very important details to lore and character backgrounds impacts other characters in extremely drastic ways that you cannot leave alone. Yone's addition had to complete Yasuo's journey moving forward, which inevitably led to him meeting Riven and having their final encounter, which led to reveal that the whole thing was a complete nothing burger. I never thought a long-standing, strongly written character such as Riven would ever be ruined and gutted like this. May her soul rest in peace. And the best part is that this was just a sidetrack explaining how completing the lore of characters without a proper end goal within the game or setting can inadvertently destroy the character development and lore of those associated with it. To return to Riot continuing the lore of Yasuo's journey, thanks to Yone's introduction into the game, now Yasuo actually has to encounter the very thing his character was seeking the whole time. Yasuo meets Riven, and this is the end of Yasuo's journey. The events following this encounter is the end of the line. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with the main event of tonight's special match on the legendary rivalries of Runeterra. The fans decided on the warm-up match of the Nightbringer versus Dawnbringer, but we have an even more explosive, special and monumentally consequential match between Riven, the Exiled, and Yasuo, the Unforgiven. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where these stories meet their endpoint. The unstoppable force versus the determined object. The winner will reign supreme and be the everlasting victor of this rivalry. The loser? Well, death holds no place in the Institute of War for whoever loses this fight. Truly, the tale ends here, folks. The winner will go on, and the loser is dead to rights. This is the battle for all the marbles. One by one, champions come into the Institute of War to fulfill their destiny, their glory, their means to an end. Whether in or outside the Institute of War, you cannot say it has no impact on the determined outcomes of the fighters involved. Some seek fame, glory, reputation, the chance to grow stronger. But this is vengeance. This is the fight. No Institute of War, no respawns, the end of the line. Truly, League of Legends history will be shaped here tonight, as the winner and loser will most likely be unplayable for the remainder of League of Legends and its longevity. One champion leaves fulfilled, one champion dies. So please, come on over, come one, come all, and witness the legendary fight outside of the Institute of War between Riven and Yasuo. Oh boy, so we're actually getting the ending of Yasuo versus Riven. They're actually going to have their fated encounter, foretold in Yasuo's lore as the bedrock for his motivation and the inspiration for his journey, and the build-up for the character we now play in the game. I can't wait to see how this ends. And it ended just as anticlimactic as Riot's writing would lead you to believe it would. So, we've just undercut a lot of character development and lore by this silly decision that Riot has decided to implement into the game, thanks to Yone, by the way. But let me address some of the more key details with regards to this point. The Institute of War was the original setting for the game, which allows the actual playable game to function within the context of the lore without characters being killed off. It also allows for the MOBA game mechanics to function in an understandable way, which doesn't actually break the rules within the actual lore because they are taking place in separate locations. The Institute of War is a contained environment than the actual outside conflicts of the wider world. But in order for the characters to be fighting within this setting while they are having an ongoing lore struggle, in order for those both to make sense together, there has to be a reason for both the setting of the game and the background lore which the characters serve. In doing so, the old lore created by Riot implemented the Institute of War system, and the means in which the Institute of War system is implemented, such as preventing political issues from arising and stopping wars from breaking out, and simultaneously presenting a setting for these champions to fight each other for these goals, or for entertainment purposes, all through the agreed consent of the champions who actually willingly participate in the Institute of War, or through the capture and imprisonment of wild monsters and demons who could cause further issues within the wider scope of the lore. Thanks to this system, a champion's place in League of Legends actually makes sense within the context of the lore and the motivation of the character. The individual story of the character might lead to an early to mid point in the lore transitioning to the character who they are now, and the mid to end point of the character's lore sees you playing out the last parts of their journey in the League of Legends. They may have goals beyond the Institute of War, which is why the lore in which the character you play as might be residing in the midpoint of what their journey entails, or the goals of the character reside in whatever they can attain from the Institute of War, therefore you're playing out the final moments of that character. This way players can vicariously play out the final moments, or play out the motivational attainment of whatever the goal the champion seeks, without actually fully completing the character's journey, because there is actually no endpoint to this lore structure, otherwise there wouldn't be a continuing game. Think of it like a fighting game with multiple different endings for each character. There might actually be a canon ending, but usually they just leave it up for the isolated, contained journey of the one character you are playing when you complete the game. And much like a fighting game character's place in their setting, the lore and motivation for the characters who are in League of Legends don't have to be groundbreaking or awe-inspiring. They can be personal to the character. An example using one of my favourite champions in the game is Fiora. Her journey ends in the Institute of War. She simply wants to be the best and prove to everyone that she's the best. After her family name was besmirched, she decided to prove that her family's name and her fighting skills were second to none. So she joined the Institute of War mainly as a representative of herself and her own family, to prove to everyone that she's the best. Particularly in the earliest days of League of Legends, the champions had explicit mention of the Institute of War in their lore, but even when they stopped mentioning it explicitly, some of the champions who were still made around when the Institute of War was still around and usable setting for the game, the characters still have their motivation that can be argued are still linked to their place in the Institute of War, like Syndra for example. Syndra clearly sees the Institute of War and her placement in it as a means to an end, where she can try out and test her powers against the most formidable combatants the Runeterra has to offer. In doing so, her placement in the Institute of War won't cause any consequence to her real life position right now, for she's in a very precarious situation with regards to her lore and her link to Ionia. Even giving this argument, I can even argue for the case that a lot of the newer champions in the game can have a sufficient reason for being in the Institute of War, assuming it was still a viable setting. Back on the topic of talking about Yasuo's lore, his is fairly straightforward. The Institute of War is where the most powerful people on Runeterra reside, so clearly the person responsible for the murder would probably be found here, but also killing is all he's good for, so he might have gotten into the killing habit and just decided to fight the rest of his days out in an arena, because that's all he's good for anymore. There's even some similarities to Riven in that he could just be trying to find a new path for himself, and he found it in the Institute of War. So I went through Riven's lore quite a lot in detail, and I even made the big showdown event of the century between Riven and Yasuo, but like I said, they have their motivations, and they have an end goal which we should theoretically never be able to attain within the game, because it will render the character unplayable because they no longer have a purpose in the game. However, Riot actually wrote the meeting between Riven and Yasuo in the lore. Again, this is the apex, the pinnacle, the end point of Yasuo's journey within the game. After this, he has nothing else to do anymore. So what happens in this meeting between Riven and Yasuo? Well, they meet each other, Yasuo challenges her to a fight, he doesn't get a response out of her, and then he just gives up. The amount of Ionian blood Yasuo went through in order to get to this final moment, and he doesn't care. Riot, what are you doing with this character? He'd probably slay endless amounts of Ionians if he can get to the one person responsible for besmirching his name. It didn't stop him before, and it didn't stop Ionia sending people after him before. Why would it stop him now? Why? Because he's a humble person? Now you're just retconning his character. But wait, it gets better, because apparently Riven is on trial for the murder of the Ionian Elder. Even though they already came to the conclusion that it was Yasuo responsible, and sent hundreds of Ionian bodies after him to support that theory, so now Riven's being trialed for the events that happened there. But apparently no one seems to care that she was the warlord who charged in there and murdered Ionians by the dozens. Her pleading guilty doesn't absolve her of those crimes. Are Ionians really this soft that they don't care about all of that? But it gets even better. Her punishment? Absolutely nothing. What, just pay back a couple Ionians, work for them like she was doing anyway? So she murders all the Ionians and then goes to apparently live among the Ionians now? And then her punishment is to do what she voluntarily did anyway. This is peak writing right here. But the best part of all of this is that Yasuo has now ticked all 3 of his boxes following this lore reveal. He's avenged his brother's now back to life, he's cleared his name because he actually got forgiven by the judges for this crime, and he has no more need to bring justice to the assassin who he claimed killed the Elder. But apparently they didn't even kill the Elder to begin with, it was a suicide. So that fated confrontation between Yasuo and Riven, which we were probably hyping up for how long, did nothing. It never happened. I was expecting one of these characters, if they ever did this lore event, to die by the end of it. That means one character would have no more reason to be in the Institute of War, and the other one would be dead, therefore they cannot participate in the Institute of War anymore. But we got none of that. Yasuo's whole character was built up around this concept, around this journey, around this path. He was a man on a mission with only the sword by his side, and he was going to stop at nothing, friend or foe, to get his job done. And now that his job is done, what are we playing Yasuo for? So Yasuo is no longer a fugitive or a wanted man in Ionia anymore. They've cleared up the crime, he's no longer a wanted man, the justice has been served. I guess in whatever kooky timeline we're using, Yasuo is no longer an enemy of Ionia anymore. Especially if you look at the Awakened cinematic. Now, the first 4 cinematics actually took place within the Institute of War. That way characters who normally wouldn't be friends with one another were actually on the same team as one another, because that's how it's possible to work within the game. Given that this isn't taking place in the Institute of War, this is an actual real-time lore event that's happening, and we have the leaders of Ionia partnering up with Yasuo, and they're fighting Sion. So very simple. Sion being around, when Sion was resurrected, he was immediately placed in the Institute of War, which was made at around the time of the first Ionia Noxus invasion, meaning he didn't participate because Noxus didn't want to risk him dying, means that everyone in Ionia hates Yasuo, meaning that if Yasuo is friendly with all of these people, then everyone in Ionia must have gotten word that Yasuo is actually not the murderer, and that means that all these lore events are actually taking place well past everything that's happened within the current state of the game. And I say this because as we are playing Yasuo, and as Yasuo is presented in-game, he's still a fugitive of Ionia. They haven't changed his voice lines, he's still a wanted man, meaning if we're still using this Yasuo for that cinematic, him being allies with Ionia is a plot hole. But unless you're willing to concede with me that there is no more coinciding lore with the gameplay anymore, let's assume that this is still fugitive Yasuo that we are currently playing as in-game with Team Ionia. Here in this cinematic we have a spiritual leader and figurehead of Ionia, the captain of the guards of Ionia, a newly retconned traitor to a ninja order who was allies of Ionia, that traitor's master whom was betrayed by this traitor, who is a member of that ninja order, and, to top it all off, Ionia's most wanted. Maybe it's just me, but if a guy sweeps away half an army all by himself, and you fear that he's gonna do the same to you, considering you accused him of doing it last time he was out on the battlefield, I'd be pretty terrified to see that man in another conflict again. But hey, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. You lot ran him out of town and constantly sent assassins after him because of the first time you accused him of doing it. Why won't he do it now? Heck, the last time he only killed his master. Now he's standing shoulder to shoulder with the leader of the Ionian resistance and the captain of the guard. Do Riot read their own lore? This doesn't make sense. He shouldn't be next to them. Irelia would be throwing blades left, right and centre. And Kennen would be throwing blades at Akali, who also shouldn't be there, judging by their new lore. She's also a traitor. In fact, judging from Akali's newly terribly written lore, she probably wouldn't trust Yasuo regardless of the circumstances. And the whole issue with Yasuo being accused of the murder and being banished from Ionia was because he abandoned his post. They're awfully forgiving, perhaps very naive. Are they sure he's not going to do it again? Bear in mind, he probably has one of the highest Ionian kill counts to his name. They should be just infighting non-stop. But hey, if a ninja running sluggishly in the middle of an open conflict with no armor didn't make sense to you, then this shouldn't either. I could go on and on about the faults within that cinematic, but I am talking about Yasuo and his motivation for being in the league. I mainly talked about one of his motivations being to bring Riven to justice. I guess that's happened. One of his other motivations was, again, I said this earlier, it's to avenge his brother's death. His brother did not have to die to him. But what's happened? His brother is back alive again. I guess he's already completed that goal then. Where was Yone in the Awakened cinematic? When does all this even take place? Am I the only person who's noticed that Yasuo is still a wanted fugitive of Ionia? He's cool with his brother because his brother's back alive and forgives him. He's cool with the murderer of the elder who Yasuo was accused of because he just had a meeting with her and now they're cool. And he's cool with Ionia because they sorted the whole thing out and he's no longer a fugitive. Wow, everything's coming up Yasuo house here. That's probably why he's got a double crit chance because he's so lucky. So he's made peace with his brother, check. He's found the murderer and brought them to justice, check. He's now forgiven for his crimes against Ionia, check. Roll credits, I guess? Wow, imagine being one of the greatest characters added into League of Legends and then being relegated to the greatest hits edition to your own game thanks to your brother, who you killed in your own lore, hence why you're even in the game. League of Legends right now is a fan fiction parody of League of Legends taking place in the canonical timeline of League of Legends. So since the actual game League of Legends is no longer lore friendly, or at least lore canonical, where's the actual lore taking place? Well, let's take a trip to Legends of Runeterra, since apparently that game is canon. As we can see in Legends of Runeterra, Yone and Yasuo are both in their human forms. So if Yone is still alive, this must mean it takes place right at the end, at the very most, of when Yone was killed. Now this is interesting. Since they're both alive, this clearly means that there is a possibility that this takes place before the first Ionia Noxus invasion. Otherwise, if it takes place afterwards, Yasuo would not be allied with Ionia. He'd be their enemy. So if this takes place before the first Ionia Noxus invasion, that means Swain wouldn't be Big Demon Boy with no hand. Unfortunately, Legends of Runeterra takes place after the first Ionian Noxus invasion, which means Yasuo is officially enemies of Ionia. This means he wouldn't be aligned with Ionia. That means all the Ionian characters hate him. Oh wait, never mind. Oh, who am I kidding? They already established the law that Yasuo made peace with Ionia. This means that this takes place after Yasuo has made peace with Ionia and made peace with his brother who... Wait, that means Yone would be a dead zombie character who's been resurrected, even though he's alive in his human form right now. I guess we could rule that one out as well. Oh, hold on, what does Papa Swain have to say about this? Well, Swain lost his arm in the first Ionian Noxus invasion at the Battle of the Placidium, thanks to Aurelia. So he didn't gain his demonic powers and his general status until well after the second Ionian Noxus rematch, which occurred in a canonically played out League of Legends match to determine the winner. Hence where the Ionian Boots of Lucidity come from. But I guess all of that's not canon anymore? What timeline even is this taking place on? Wait, hold on. He knows Riven. He knows Riven's the murderer, which means that this takes place... Wait, if he knows Riven's the murderer, and his brother's still alive, how did his brother not know that Riven's the murderer? Surely the little court case that they had would have sorted all of this out. Is any of this even canon? What timeline is this? Heck if I'm gonna bother working this out anymore. And an additional note to add, because this could be used as a good point, is that Zed is also playable for the Ionian team, despite the fact that he's clearly a bad guy and has several conflicts with some Ionians. Let's just make it clear that Zed is on Ionia's side against other nations. He was actually with the Ninja Order, and he betrayed them in order to become more powerful, but also to fight for Ionia. Yasuo is an actual outcast of Ionia, and they are now his new enemies. Having Yasuo fight for Ionia would be like having Riven fight for Noxus, despite the fact that she abandoned them long ago. So mainstream League of Legends, we're playing Yasuo as he is still on his journey to find out the true killer, absolve his name, and avenge his brother. That's who we're playing as. In the ongoing lore of League of Legends, Yasuo has already completed all 3 of these goals. In Legends of Runeterra, Yasuo is friends with Ionia but enemies with his brother, and also knows it was Riven, all the while he's supposed to be a fugitive, and I don't know what to make of this anymore. You know, I used to read the old lore extensively, and I used to enjoy it, and you never used to get muddled up this badly. All of this could have been avoided if you just didn't add Yone into the game. But thanks Yone, now look at the mess you've made of Yasuo and Riven. I hope it was worth it. And with that, I wrap up the first main issue that I have with Yone being in League of Legends. Thank you all for staying within the rage cage for this long. If you liked what you heard, tell me by leaving a like, leave a comment of your own, and please share this video as much as possible. I want to know what people think about this. Am I right? Am I wrong? Are there things I missed out? Part 2 will be Yone's kit and its influence on him as a character and within the greater setting of the game. But until that video, stay tuned. Tally ho.